Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It's Tuesday, March 18th. Derek Van Riper here with Eno Saris. On this episode, baseball is back. We will talk about the season opening matchup between the Dodgers and Cubs. Got it underway early Tuesday morning here. If you are in the States, if you live in other parts of the world, perhaps it was even easier for you to watch that game as it happened live. We got an interesting piece that was written about Shohei Ohtani and the unique contact point he has compared to other top hitters. So we're just going to bring that into our conversation as well. Spencer Strider looked like pre-injury Spencer Strider in his first game action of the spring on Monday. So we're expecting a late frenzy in leagues where people are still building their rosters here in the next 10 days or so. So we'll talk about the implications of that. And we've got a bunch of other news items, plus some late ADP movement overall with the main event starting. Eno did the NFBC main event draft with our buddy JH. So we'll talk about Eno's board and some of the things he saw happening there. Tons of ground to cover. And Eno's back from Arizona. So what's going on, man? How was your trip?
It had its ups and its downs. It's a kind of grueling for me. I don't know how the veterans do it. I met people that had been out there for 30 days and 40 days, and I had 10 days on the ledger, and by the end of it, I felt like bruised and battered. So I'm happy to be home, but I kind of wish I'd showed up on a weekend day so I could get some relaxation in. But no. Ever onward and upward.
He'll learn at some point to leave that buffer in the travel schedule. But if you'd like to join our Discord, you can do that with the link in the show description. In there, we still have leagues forming. We got team chats, got mailbag questions, all sorts of good stuff in there. So be sure to jump in. One quick programming note. We do have 2 live episodes just 1 week away. Bear Bottle Brewing Company, the Bernal Heights location in San Francisco, March 27th and March 28th, 4:30 start time on both days. Free admission, no tickets required. We'll be there watching games prior to the start of the show. So we're really looking forward to spending the day with many of our listeners. And we got Kayakers Cove, the beer that Eno helped brew. That's going to be available as well. And some giveaways. We got our merch. We're excited about the merch. It's supposed to be on its way. So fingers crossed it will be there on time for the live shows.
Yeah, the Roadcaster is here. It has arrived. Everybody calm down. The big piece of equipment that we need to make sure this live show goes off without a hitch is here. So we are ready to go. It's just a question of all the other parts that fall into place. Some of those moving.
The recording device is even more important than the actual merch. But
exactly.
We're excited about the merch. So we want that to be there too. Let's talk about this game that went down on Tuesday morning. The Dodgers win the series opener with the Cubs, 4-1. Shota Imanaga, Yoshinobu Yamamoto, a great matchup of 2 Japanese-born pitchers at the Tokyo Dome. And, of course, this is a game in which you also have Shohei Ohtani and Seiya Suzuki. So a great celebration for the game on an international stage. And kind of as you'd expect, shorter outings from both starters, kind of an uncharacteristically shaky day control-wise for Imanaga, but 4 scoreless innings and no hits against the Dodgers. You'll take that when you have to make that start in the middle of March. And I came away from these starts looking at it and going, man, everything I thought about Yoshinobu Yamamoto, I think he's an ace. I think it's just innings this year. I think he could easily be a top 10 pitcher, and he delivered his first time out.
Yeah. I wonder just the role of adrenaline and sort of uniqueness of this opening day. Maybe opening day in general has velocity bumps. I haven't actually studied that day in particular, but I do know that like postseason has a velocity bump, and that really had like what I thought was a postseason feel to it, just with kind of being in a strange environment, not being at home or in a place you've played a lot. Just the amount of media coverage, and I thought some of the guys looked a little tired when they were being interviewed. It can be tough, the jet lag. So, I know that Yamamoto's pitched there before, but both he and Imanaga had fairly big velocity bumps, and Yamamoto's was pretty huge. I mean, he was in the first inning or so 98 He settled down a little bit, but for the game, he was 9.68. That's up 1.3 over last year. What was it for Imanaga? He was for the game 9.26. That's up almost a full tick. So, how much do you take away from one game? They're healthy. They pitched pretty well, both of them. They were up in velo. If Yamamoto is really going to sit 9.68 this year, then I agree with you. I mean, he looked pretty unhittable with the curve splitter combo. And after kind of all this hope I'd had for his slider, in both cases, both Yamamoto and Imanaga did not really demonstrate great sliders. Imanaga put his in the dirt a bunch of times, and Yamamoto didn't really throw any. He threw 2 cutters and sliders. So maybe he's just going to revert to what gave him all that success in Japan and not necessarily need to add a slider like most pitchers in America.
Or just bring that wrinkle later, and maybe it's a small wrinkle. Maybe when he's pitching even deeper into starts, we'll see it a little bit more. So, yeah, it's kind of a work in progress potentially for Yamamoto, or something he may not have to use at all. But I'm curious to see where the velo goes to. It does make sense there'd be an extra bump there. I mean, also being in a dome, more controlled conditions, that could also be a factor as well. I don't know, calibration of equipment, right? It's another stadium that we're not always using in the rotation, getting our data. So lots of little factors that could have been an impact. Ben Kasparius touched 98.5. He actually threw the fastest pitch in the game 1 of the season. I did see the Ben Brown outing was a little bit frustrating. 14 swinging strikes jumps off the page, first and foremost, but the command was a little shaky. He got squeezed a couple of times, but he didn't do himself any favors with where he was locating overall. You look at what he was able to do: 5 Ks in 2 2/3, but 3 runs, 2 of them were earned, 3 walks. I think he's going to be one of those guys you have to wait on from a fantasy perspective this year. I keep drafting him and trying to stash him on my bench, but I could see it being one of those scenarios where the opportunity for him to be used like a starter once the team returns to the States takes longer than I want it to. And he ends up being the type of early season cut that I don't want to make, but that I have to make in some leagues.
Yeah, I mean, the usage suggests that he has more in common with Ben Kasparius than he does with anybody else in that game. Just coming out as the first person after the starter's out, I mean, feels like he's in the pen. I don't know. I mean, unless you think that's a kind of a piggyback situation. There are limited uses in some leagues for, pitchers that can be like this. That's SPRPs that can vulture wins and get holds, that's maybe where he's headed. I mean, the one thing about Brown also is he's one of the 2 pitchers in the league in the game that were down in velo, and he's still only a 2-pitch pitcher, so that velo really matters. I'd had some hope for the discussions that he'd had in the spring about adding pitches, but he didn't show that either. He threw 1 changeup. Yeah,
I think the usage in this case, if you remember last year, the series that we had between the Dodgers and Padres, it's kind of an all hands like short playoff series situation where being that bridge guy doesn't matter as much in this instance as it would if it happened on opening day stateside with no days off in the schedule. Even those days off for rainouts can change the way you use some of the guys in your roster. I just think
you're not going to use your 4th and 5th starters in this series, and they can rest all the way till whenever they want to. So yeah, I guess you're right. It doesn't necessarily mean but I'm putting together what his mix is, with that, and right now we're emphasizing across baseball, the wideness of your mix as a starter, and he's doing the other way.
Yeah, I just have that slight concern that maybe Colin Ray gets the first opportunity as the number 5 starter and Brown has to wait, despite the fact there were a few positives in the outing for him in game 1. Freddie Freeman was a late scratch with left rib discomfort, reports suggesting he's a 75% chance of playing in game 2. Hey, at least it's not a foot thing, right? I mean, that was sort of my main takeaway.
Say that I heard that he's not playing in night games, day games after night games or something.
I think that was one of the reports that was going around this spring, is that they're going to try and ease the workload on him that way, to not use him in day games after night games as part of the like a load management sort of thing.
I'd move Freddie Freeman down your boards.
Yeah, okay, but how much?
Coming off of surgery, and he's going to miss 20 games this year?
You think it's 20?
I mean, I thought that I saw that there was no sort of end date on that. That was just like the plan for the year.
Yeah, but if he's fine in June, maybe they back off that. Like if healthy, health-wise, he feels good. I don't know. I mean,
but I mean, also the rib thing is like he's old. He's older than you might think,
right?
And so the rib thing is like one of those, just like, oh yeah, these little things can pop up too. So like, I think the over/under on games played for Freddie Freeman this year is like 138.
Still pretty good. Okay, but for a guy you'd be taking in round 2, maybe you're not as excited about the possibility of getting less than a full playing time ceiling. I did see in the main event drafts that have happened so far, it's about a 5-pick drop compared to where Freeman normally goes. Pick 31 in the mains. He's been going at pick 26 across all first half of March NFBC drafts so far. Is that enough of a discount?
There are so many nice first basemen. And so many nice hitters at the top of that draft that I'm just out. Freeman went in ours at 32. And at that point, he was being picked over Ketel Marte, which I guess I can see. Marte's had some soft tissue issues of his own. And Manny Machado, who we got in the 3rd round. We got Manny Machado, though, after 5 straight pitchers. So obviously people were looking to go pitcher there. The person who got Freeman went Witt Jr., Riley, Freeman, Abrams, and didn't take a pitcher until the 5th. So Freeman is right now in the uncomfortable spot that he's up against the pitchers. And you're going to be either Freeman. I mean, Machado is what we got, and Devers, but, do you want to take Machado and Devers at 30, or do you want to take a pitcher, or do you want to take Ketel Marte? That's the choice in front of you. I would, I think third base is really rough. Machado looks healthy. I might take Machado there over Freeman. If I didn't have a pitcher yet, I'd be very tempted by Corbin Burns. I mean, it went Burns, Sale, Snell, DeGrom, Reagans. It's like those are all pretty exciting pitchers too.
The run you just described is exactly what makes the main event drafts different, or what makes the very end of March drafts that are higher stakes different. You just see that helium on pitching, and usually it's older, even if they're healthy, it's older bats. You'll see guys like Harper fall. You'll see Freeman fall. Even Manny Machado goes a little later in a draft like that. Ketel Marte, like all those core guys that look really safe, that you feel good about the projections for, that when you're building draft and holds, you just think are like complete foundational players. People seem much more willing to miss on those guys and bump up the pitcher they want to avoid missing out on an ace. That's the overall observation of like how those drafts have been playing differently over the years. And again, this
Manny Machado with the 9th pick of the 3rd round.
Yeah. That's a great spot for Manny Machado. Yeah, so huge value. I did mention a piece that went up recently from David Adler of MLB.com, writes a lot about the StatCast data over there, and taking a look at Shohei Ohtani and contact points, which is kind of the next wave of data that we're going to have available, and where are hitters in the box and where are they making contact, and these things are really important in terms of approach and being able to get to your power. And I think the piece is highly recommended, but kind of the hack to making something like this work, to have a deep contact point, is having excellent bat speed, which Ohtani does. And it's unusual that he's as deep in the box as he is, or as deep at the contact point as he is, but he's able to do that because of how good his bat speed is. And most of the guys, even a lot of guys that have bat speed like that, still try to catch it out front, right? We hear that all the time. We hear that as like a common approach to hitting league wide. You want to try to make contact, catch it out in front of the plate. And I think what Ohtani does is very unique. You see ridiculous home runs to parts of the field that you just wouldn't expect, and you see it against pitches that are extremely high velocity pitches. There's an example in the story of Paul Skeens. He took him deep to center field on a top shelf fastball, and it's just like, how do you do it? Well, you have a different kind of approach, but you also have elite bat speed.
Yeah, I think one thing I heard a hitting coach say was just that bat speed, elite bat speed, or high bat speed, just gives you more ways to be good. It's another way of saying it. Like if you have a really short swing that's not fast, you have to be Stephen Kwan or Luis Arias or Freddie Freeman. You have to have elite bat to ball. You don't have to have all these other things. If you have elite bat speed, you can be any one of a bunch of players that do it differently. So Julio Rodriguez does it differently than Juan Soto, that does it differently than Aaron Judge, and so elite bat speed opens up more pathways to the future. I thought, one thing that's interesting, I thought I'd go down, and they had comps at the bottom, which were, similar style hitters to Ohtani with deeper contact points. Now, they don't all have the same power outcomes. The ones that I thought I would see were Juan Soto, Aaron Judge, and Marcell Ozuna. Those are elite bat speed guys who let the ball travel a little bit because they can push it out. They can hit the ball out to the opposite field, even with that reduction that comes in ball flight when you go to the opposite field. Opposite field fly balls don't go as far. If you have elite bat speed like Judge, Ozuna, and Soto, then you can still get it out, even to the opposite field. The names that were a little bit surprising, I guess JD Martinez is not that surprising to me because he is a guy who goes to right field a lot. His power's down, his bat speed's down a little bit, so I guess that's not too surprising. But like Freddie Freeman being on this list was a little surprising because he's always had good power, but he has poor bat speed. And so there's something about what he does that I think is interesting. I think one of the things that I notice with Freddie Freeman and his feet is that of these guys that I just mentioned, he stands the closest to the plate. And so even though he's letting it travel, if you stand closer to the plate, it's more of a pull. Like it's like this 3D space. That's another thing that gets covered in this story is like they have the space from your center of mass to the plate. You have your, like this, you have this space from his center of mass to the plate. You have his, how far behind the plate you set up. Look at Ohtani. He looks like he's not even in the box.
Yeah, he's going as far back as you can really go.
Yeah, and so with Freeman, he's standing closer to the box even than that, and so I think even though deeper contact point, he can still, with a super short swing, I think he can still kind of pull some of those. So, yeah, our whole ideas of like pull out in front. We're going to be able to really dial these in with contact point because, from what I understand, contact point is here, obviously, like he's looking at it right now. It's coming for us soon. We'll have bat speed, we'll have swing length, and I think we'll also, from what I understand, have attack angle at some point. And if you think about all of those aspects, if you have the bat speed, if you have the attack angle, if you have the contact point, if you have the swing length, you can actually now start to, and I hope I have the horses to do this. Unfortunately, we don't have Max Bay anymore, but it's time for public bat path grades because we couldn't do that before with just swing length and swing speed. As you can see from this, it matters where you make contact, where are you even standing to some point. Like you have to kind of map out this entire three-dimensional situation.
And I do think when you look at the overall leaderboards that they have at Savant, and you see that, okay, well, yeah, Freddie Freeman is lower in bat speed. He's also short to the ball, right? It's a very short swing.
Short swing, yeah.
Right, like out of the like Luis Arias is the shortest to the ball of anybody, right? Like at even 6.0 for swing leg for feet. Freddie Freeman's at 6.8. There's only 14 other guys that are same or shorter to the ball.
And Freddie Freeman has the most power out of all those guys.
Right. And then you also notice that they have the fast swing rate metric that we talked about when this was new. Those are swings greater than or equal to 75 miles per hour. Freeman does seem to have like an A swing that he gets off where he does kind of go to that level. So I think
maybe he's just a real advanced feel guy that's like picking and choosing and
That's what I think we're seeing overall. I think, again, we're going to keep putting all these pieces together, but I think that's a really good hitter type to be, even though it's not elite bat speed.
There's always going to be, I do talk to front offices about bat speed, and I think we'll have a thing about hitting development soon. I've been working for a while with Jen McCaffrey on a piece, but the reason why bat path grades may never get to the level of stuff grades is just that A, it's reactionary, and B, we don't even have names. Do we have names for what I just described with Freeman? Like with the pitching, you'd be like, oh, well, stuff is great, but there's arsenal interactions, depth of arsenal, command, these things. I don't even know what to call what I just said Freeman is doing. He's like hitterish.
There's a barrel control component, right? Like how well do you control the barrel? But also
there's something, I think there's something in his head. Like this is offensive to some. I'm saying he's guessing right, but it's not guessing right. It's
anticipating. It's having a plan.
Anticipating, understanding what they're trying to do to you, and putting the right swing on the right ball. I bet you that's sort of the command of hitting. It's really hard to replicate. The elite guys who demonstrate year over year have it. Some guys have it for like a couple weeks and everyone's like, oh my God. And then they fall off of it, So like whatever that word is, I think it's most analogous to command.
We had one other question coming out of this Dodgers-Cubs game. It came from Nikki in our Discord. Do we have concerns about Mookie Betts' health beyond Tokyo? And we've talked about it very briefly with James Anderson yesterday. My initial thought was he's going to miss these 2 games. There's still some time before the next part of the schedule starts up, so a little time to regain strength, to feel better. But do you have any longer-term concerns about that? It sounds like Mookie's lost 15 pounds in the last couple of weeks.
Yes, I'm concerned. We basically had, me and JH have basically had like a 15-minute conversation about Mookie Betts before the draft started. Because we were drafting 9. And if we got Gunnar Henderson, and we're very happy about that because he's starting baseball activities and he's also younger than Mookie and he didn't lose 15 pounds. You know what I mean? Like that's like such a hard reset. And the other thing that we were talking about was it's really hard to put weight on during the season. You don't have the same weightlifting opportunities and eating. And, in the off season, you can pair your eating and your weightlifting to like all be like put bulk on. During the season, from what I understand, it's mostly just about like, can I not lose muscle mass? It's like just holding on to it as long as possible. Now, there are a bit of different body types, and maybe Trevor didn't have this problem, and maybe I'm thinking too much of Brandon McCarthy telling me that, like, I can't keep the weight on during the season at all. But Mookie looks a little bit more like Brandon McCarthy than he does like Trevor May. So, like, I feel like May talking about his gams of steel, dude, that's what Strider was looking like out there. But Mookie's always been a thinner guy. So, there's also this risk that last year we saw the kind of the denouement of his power. What if he doesn't get it back? So now you're saying, okay, even he's always going to hit the ball. He has the elite hit tool. And I think he's going to steal 10 to 15 bases. But there is an outcome this year where Mookie just hits 280, 15-15.
With a lot of runs and RBIs, barring an IL stint.
That's true. That was the one thing that kept him on our board. But we had him behind Gunnar because we just feel like Gunner's in a pretty good offense himself. And, so I think Mookie, in our draft, he fell to 14, which is not a huge fall. But I think that might have been before. No, we heard about the 15 pounds. So 14. I think around the turn it makes sense. They paired Betts and Lindor as a pretty good pairing at the top. That's a lot of power and speed and probably runs in RBI. But they're probably a little bit behind on power. So he went Pete Alonso third. So I guess that's a good pairing to figure it out. I think personally for me, Betts versus Churio, I think I might take Churio. I don't know maybe I'm being crazy, but like Betts versus Julio Rodriguez, I might take Julio Rodriguez. So for me on my board, it's maybe Betts versus Yordan Alvarez.
I've had Mookie behind all those guys since the hitter rankings published. So I haven't even had to move him based on names you're throwing out there right now. It's more of a question. It's sort of like the inverse of the Strider. It's like, okay, there's a slight discount right now. Is that going to be like a panicked, here's another half round, here's another 6 to 8 picks where he falls? Does he slide far enough where you're looking at Mookie late round 2? You're looking at Mookie versus Freddie Freeman, or you're looking at Mookie versus William Contreras. Like, is that
Mookie
a discount you
Wyatt
take?
Langford, I'm taking Mookie. I mean, he's done it,
Sure.
We got 1 month out of Wyatt Langford. So I don't think I'd let him fall we got Jackson Merrill second round. If Betts had been there, I guess we would have taken him, but we were but we're very happy with the Gunnar Henderson Jackson Merrill start.
I got Merrill right next to Mookie Betts, right ahead of him right now.
Error punching right now. Oh, you have Merrill ahead.
Right, just right there, one spot.
Yeah, because if I'm talking about 280, 15, 15, like Merrill's going to beat maybe all 3 of those numbers.
Yeah, and he hit more homers last year and hit for a higher average last year.
Well, look at you out in front of this. Maybe out in front of the market on this one.
I mean, I'm out in front of what the market's doing right now.
But
I might
you
still be
personally
wrong.
don't even feel that negative about him.
I don't feel that bad about Betts. I'm more like, I think I already had it sort of priced in. If you want to say I'm taking Lindor ahead of him now, sure, go ahead. They're close enough all along. I'm not going to argue against that, or Harper or Turner. They're so close in projection. Don't think you're making a mistake if you do flip Betts down a couple of spots. If he falls more than 3 or 4 spots among hitters, you're probably getting a nice discount, barring some further information about this being a longer term problem than it appears to be. But it's a good question from Nikki, with a lot of folks still having drafts here in the next 10 days or so. Speaking of folks who have drafts in the next 10 days or so, what is going to happen to the price of Spencer Strider? 6 Ks, 2 2/3 scoreless. He didn't walk anybody. He didn't hit anybody. He looked fantastic. Looked like the stuff was there. The velocity looked like it was there. The command looked really crisp. I know we're not going to get him right away to begin the season, so there's going to be a little bit of a lag before he's in your lineups. But what kind of adjustment, if any, are you making after seeing what Strider did in his return to game action on Monday?
One thing that I really liked was the command looked like it was there. Like he was putting the pitches where he wanted. He also threw a changeup that looked nastier than his changeup, I remember, and he threw curveballs. So he threw everything. I like that. He was also super efficient. I mean, he had like 9 straight strikes to start the whole thing. I think it only took him like 10 pitches to get through the first inning, or maybe it was 9. He wasn't supposed to go as deep in the game. Like he was like, if I get 2 ups, I'm happy, at least according to CJ Nitkowski in the booth there. And he got into the 3rd inning. So I wonder if the team at some point is like, why are we rehabbing him in the minors? Why don't we just, if he's got a 3 inning start in him, let's just take this 3 innings in the majors, So he could be in the majors faster, but not like on a full. I think of like how they stretched Drew Rasmussen out in the majors in Tampa, where he was like 3 or 4 to begin with, because they also think they might make the postseason and they want Strider in the postseason. So that would be a little bit disastrous for some people, because then he wouldn't like give you any quality starts or any wins for a while. And I could see them doing that all the way into May, just kind of being 3 and 4, and maybe he's like hyper efficient and gets to 5. That's what Drew Rasmussen did a few times, but I think they would do it that way. That makes a lot of sense from the team perspective. You're also stretching him out slowly. You're giving him regular work. You're using those in the major leagues as opposed to minor leagues. You're keeping some innings for the postseason. They did mention that I think he's like a few strikeouts short of some benchmark where it's like the fastest starting pitcher to ever get to that benchmark in strikeouts. So even if he does that 3 to 4 inning thing, which would be on the bad end of outcomes, he's going to give you a ton of strikeouts. He's going to just give you a ton of strikeouts. And like the worst case scenario is you're racking up strikeouts. You're not getting many wins until they let him go deeper.
Yeah. If they do use him in the big leagues, they were planning on waiting until late April to bring him back. And at that point, you'd say, okay, 4 or 5 innings right away.
Maybe they could do 3, 4,
But if you already went 2 2/3 that very first time out, I think it's going to be a reasonably short window before he's stretched out enough to at least go 5 and be eligible for wins in his starts.
He looked right. He looked good.
And most of the main drafts that are folded into this data have already happened 23 picks earlier in main event drafts than in the rest of drafts for the first half of March for Spencer Strider. That's probably going to jump yet again. When does it become too much? I mean, the price, like the way you describe Strider is he could be phenomenal in Ks even without a massive volume compared to his peers. That's a lot like a Tyler Glasnow description. Mm-hmm. And I'm Mr. Tyler Glasnow. I want Tyler Glasnow on as many teams as possible, and I have him on a lot of teams. Glasnow was going at pick 77. Strider was going at 91. Are we looking at 15 plus more picks for Strider, or is it going to be even higher than that?
Guess what happened in our main?
Yeah?
Glasnow went in the middle of the 5th, so around 70, so that's 63. So Glasnow went 68, Strider went 69.
All right. If that's the price, are you in on either or both of them?
Yeah. I want to. There's a little bit of thing to address here, which is like, you know, when we talk about main events, and we're going to talk about main event today, you know, there's a emphasis on this sort of, it's a free agency league, it's deep. There's an emphasis on, are you there for me at the beginning of the season? Because if not, I don't know if I can wait around for you. You know, this sort of very week to week, like, you know, people churn their rosters. People go through it and like stream hitters. Streaming hitting happens in NFC all the time, and it doesn't really happen in most people's leagues. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. We didn't take him. We didn't take either of those. We had a little bit more of a conservative streak to us. We got Cease, Fromber right after Strider, actually the next pick. Cease and Fromber, and then we took a long time off of pitching and got back to the end of the board because we thought pitching for us is just going to be a churn and burn, you know. And if you think you're going to be a churn and burn and you're in a churn and burn league, then Strider's not a great fit for you because you're just going to be itching to have that roster spot back. But most other leagues, like I think a lot of people play in 12-team leagues, you want to have the upside. Especially if you have an IL slot, you can stash them and you can go and have some fun on the IL, you know, with that extra slot. One of the nicest things in these shallower leagues to have a guy put on the IL because the waiver wire is just bursting with opportunity. You know, people who got jobs, people who pitched all well through the spring while you were drafting or whatever. So I have, and so in my rankings, it's just really hard to split the difference of that. So I have Spencer Strider ranked 20th right now, right behind Yamamoto, and a couple behind Glasnow. I guess that would make him draftable. Yeah, that would make him draftable. Yamamoto went 60 in this league. So, yeah, he's draftable. He's on my list. I think just certain leagues make it a little bit harder to own than others.
Yeah, and I think the Dodger pitcher discount continues to be based on the likelihood of 6-man rotation basically erasing 2 starts in a week. Like that's the main argument against that group.
Yeah, because I have Yamamoto with
nice
130 innings. And when I did the math on a 6-inning thing, I think we maxed out at 130. 6-starter rotation maxed out at 135. So I'm having Yamamoto like pretty close to what could be his max. Of course, they might do 5-man for a little bit. So maybe you could get to 140, 145. But that was, other than Julio Urias. We looked at it and it was like 140 was really the kind of the modern Dodgers top of innings. So that's what you're hoping there. But like, you know, I have DeGrom 12, and we took Fromber, who I have 10th. That shows that bias towards leagues where I'm valuing bulk, right? Because you could take Strider and Glasnow over Fromber in a 12 and a 10 team. Where you're just like, I want the good guy. I want the guy with all the strikeouts.
Yeah, if you've got IL spots in your league, and that's most people listening, you should be leveraging that. You should be taking on that extra risk and playing for ceiling for sure, because you can live to tell the tale. You can use that waiver wire to your benefit, use those extra roster spots that you get from having the IL to your benefit, and get those guys in your lineup at, you know, a fraction of the cost of a typical ace. Like it's still a discount. Even in leagues that have IL spots, it's a discount worth taking. Some other news-related stuff. How about this? Cam Smith closing in on an opening day roster spot.
What is the news item attached to this?
I think it's just an excuse to talk about Cam Smith, really?
No, I mean, like, what is the, like, who said this?
I think it started, and I see there's another update. Chandler Rome has one as of Monday. Chandler Rome saying it still seems far-fetched that Smith will break camp as Houston's everyday right fielder. And the previous report suggesting that it was close was from Will Kunkel of Fox 26 in Houston.
Okay. Yeah, because I just there's a great piece if you want to read about this. Chandler Rome wrote a piece today, or I don't know if it's today or yesterday, about this, about Zach DeCenzo and Cam Smith, and it was just really eye opening because you can hear Chandler Rome walking the line, and even the way he crafted the story was amazing. I thought it was really good writing and thinking, which is. They say unequivocally, and they've shown in their past, that they only want their young players to get everyday at bats. They don't want to have a prospect that doesn't have everyday at bats, like in the big leagues. You know what I mean? And they've said that, and they've acted that way. And so there's only one spot on the roster where they could maybe get everyday bats, and that's right field. And Chas McCormick is the incumbent. Now, Chas McCormick had a terrible season last year, and he's not even hitting that well in spring, but he does have a 420 OBP. And, it seems like a little bit of folly to be like, okay, we've had, 20 at-bats from Chas McCormick, so we're moving on. But on the other hand, that is not the hardest bar to clear. Like, maybe Chas McCormick can just be a backup outfielder. There were parts of last year where he certainly looked the part. So, only one of Cam Smith and Zach DeCenzo can get that job, and the job is right field, and the loser is Chas McCormick if it happens. So at least Chandler sort of listed it, and the whole reason is you're kind of losing Chas McCormick as an asset if you do that, and that's why we've talked about that the line of the DFA versus the has no options and stuff like that. That sort of team building philosophy. And we actually had a question in the Discord that I don't think we necessarily answered, which is like how many teams ascribe to this? And I would say all of them care about not losing an asset. They really don't want to DFA a player. They want to do everything they can until that point. And when they get to DFAing, it's like, okay, he doesn't have a value on our roster anymore, Some teams are more aggressive in it. We've talked about the Guardians holding on to guys until the very minute, and then sometimes DFAing guys they did want just because they got a roster crunch. Whereas the Rays and Brewers and some other teams are a little bit more about we're going to trade this guy 2 years before we have to put him on the 40-man, just so we don't get into a roster crunch. They both make mistakes. Like the Xavier Edwards situation. That's a little bit, I think, of a slight mistake on the Rays' part. They traded him just to not have to put him on the roster, but he could help them at shortstop, like right now.
Yeah, I mean...
And then Junior Caminero might have been, I don't know if that's the other one, but the Guardians have had Rule 5 drafts where like everyone's taking Guardians.
I mean, I think the thing about the Xavier Edwards trade, though, that was November of 2022. So a lot changed for the Rays, right? Like that was before they knew things that were happening with Wander. Like they made that trade.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Okay. That's good context.
Yeah. Timeline.
But I'm just saying that both methods can make mistakes. Either like trying to be too aggressive and then you trade somebody 2 years before and then they break out after you trade them away, or holding on to a bunch of people until you're like, oh, we just have to announce like 5 DFAs or just get robbed in the Rule 5 this year.
So thinking about it in the context of that Chandler wrote about it, are you looking at this more as a Smith may have to wait a few weeks and see Chas McCormick continue to struggle like he did last year in order to get that spot? Like, do you think that's the tipping point for when we'll see Cam Smith in 2025?
I do, because you can put Chas McCormick and Ben Gamel out there in a platoon, and that's a fine idea. It's not an exciting idea, but it's one that keeps Chas McCormick on the roster and Ben Gamel and keeps your options open. And you can put, as Chandler Rome lines up, you can put Cam in Double-A where he hasn't played. He hasn't played in Double-A very much.
I know it's surprising, right? It'd be very quick, but I think the only kind of Dana Brown related example of someone that moved that fast, Michael Harris.
Oh, yeah. The Braves have moved
just because of need, right? I mean, like, and then even that I think was more time for Harris, but Harris was a high school draftee, not a college kid. So slight difference in experience and age and those factors too. But I don't know. I don't think the quick path, because of the way the incentives work for getting guys into the mix for Rookie of the Year, I feel like teams are more willing to be aggressive, as they should be. So it seems like it's still up in the air.
One thing that I want to mention real quick, though, is that I guess Brendan Rodgers has been all right this spring, or whoever is going to be their second baseman.
Yeah, Dubon or whatever.
You can undo all of this just by putting Altuve back at second. Chas McCormick and Ben Gamel in one corner and Cam Smith in the other. So that realization in my head makes it kind of like, I mean, especially if we start seeing Altuve back at second in spring games.
I just wish there was a question mark at the bottom of the screen. That's where I feel I feel like it is more of a question at this point. But
you could take it, like you could take it in redraft leagues. You can take him with your bench picks because those bench picks aren't designed to hang around. In our draft, we took in the bench Mike Clevenger and Bo Brisky, and and we have no attachment to them. If they're not closers, bye-bye, So like closer ideas, and then like Jack Caglione is swinging super, super hard in Kansas City right now. And he has had an amazing spring. And they have a terrible outfield. And there's actually kind of like there's not as much being made of it. But there's kind of a similar situation where in Kansas City, do you like go into the season with Hunter Renfroe as a starter out there with MJ Melendez, and maybe even Maikel Garcia in center? That's where he's been playing a lot. Or do you kind of ride the wave and take Jack Caglione? I'm guessing that they won't push Caglione. He didn't even make it to AA last year, but his numbers this spring are eye popping, and he's a college guy, top pick, could just be ready for a team that's supposed to be pretty good, that could find a place to put him, So I think these things tend towards, come back in a couple weeks, kid.
Right. So they just sent him to minor league camp on Monday. So Jack Caglione's he's not going to make the opening day roster. But then you start looking at it. You never want to use the Angels as like a blueprint for what other teams are going to do. But think about how quickly, Zach Neto moved, right? Mm-hmm. Like that was pretty fast, man. Like that was,
yeah.
If teams think someone can help them win now, and the Royals are one of those teams that I think have a window right now, and as long as they're not doing what they feel is wrong by development, they're going to do it.
Cam Smith, opening day roster, I'm going with 35.
Yeah, I was going to say 33. There's like a 1 in 3 chance. So, and if that's what you're looking at, you take that chance late and you just cut the player and move on if it doesn't happen. Like it's a complete late dart because of what you said at the beginning. If they have him on the roster, they're going to play him. Right. And if he plays well, he keeps the spot. It's really straightforward. Here's one for you. David Bednar still hasn't been named the Pirates closer. What's going on there?
I don't know what's worse. So David Bednar hasn't been named the closer. Alexis Diaz, I don't know if he's been named the closer or whatever, but his manager just said some like interesting things about him and then sent him to pitch on a minor league game on the backfield.
That might not be a good sign.
Alexis Diaz and David Bednar are officially on the hot seat. I thought I would go look through spring K-minus BBs and give you, these are just notable K-minus BBs, but I think there were like 1086 pitchers, or maybe it was only like 1012. Yeah, Alexis Diaz is in the bottom 10. So of the 1,012 pitchers that have pitched this spring, Alexis Diaz has the 1,005th K-minus BB at minus 22%, which I've never seen. Of course, I put innings pitched in there for a reason. I also wanted to, on this list, put some guys that maybe we're not that worried about. Are we worried about Josh Hader? We're worried about Luis Castillo. Then there are some guys maybe you are worried about. Robert Suarez only has a 0 K minus BB, and I've gotten, when are we worried about him kind of stuff. I did want to throw Taylor Rogers and Colin Holderman on there because those two guys are near the top in usage on their teams and seem to be the next guys in line. So if you have a Bednar or Diaz, I think getting Rogers or Holderman makes sense if you have Bednar or Diaz. And maybe even if you don't have Bednar or Diaz, getting a Rogers or Holderman late could net you a closer.
Yeah, I think
I like Holderman a little bit better, just to be on the record.
I think I'm with you on that. Rogers has done it before. He's had a lot of trouble with home runs in the last couple of years since he was a closer. It's definitely a possibility.
He's not pitching in Cincinnati right now.
Yeah.
Although Arizona's probably pretty homer friendly.
It's a pretty homer friendly environment to be in the Cactus League. I was kind of impressed by a couple of the arms the Reds had in their spring breakout game. Luis May is one that I was reading up about a little bit. Throws really hard, pretty bad walk rates in the minors, but the kind of guy that in an unsettled situation could show up, get some opportunities in low leverage and quickly climb the ladder. I think that's a bullpen that can be conquered by just about anybody this year. And I would say the same is true in Pittsburgh. Even if you like Holderman as the first option up, if they don't go with Bednar, someone else, not even on the roster right now, could end up being the longer term solution for that ninth inning role as the season plays out.
Yeah, I did notice that of the top 50 in or top 60 in leverage last year. So we're talking about the back two for your for a team. So top 60 in leverage. Only one pitcher had never pitched in the big leagues before. I already tell you this one.
Only one had never pitched in the big leagues before.
Yeah.
Before last season.
Yeah.
I feel like we saw Justin Martinez before last season. So I don't think it's Justin Martinez.
It's Justin Slayton.
Justin Slayton. Okay. He was a Rule 5 pick last year, right?
Which meant he had to be in the big leagues. So I guess that was in his favor. But it also is wow, that's the only one, because you also wouldn't be oh, yes, the Red Sox are going to be the one that needs to go to somebody like that in the back of the bullpen. But so there might be a surprise from the minor leagues, but if you are looking for holds and saves, look in the major leagues. I think those guys get the first look.
All right. Well, it's still weird to me that David Bednar, he's struggling this spring. That's part of the problem. I thought he'd put the pieces back together. We've talked about the pitch tipping from last year. The velocity was there. The stuff was there. If you could make that adjustment back to the pre-2024 Bednar, there was no reason to believe why he couldn't reclaim that job. But he's struggling to do that here so far this spring.
It's the same stuff this spring. I mean, his stuff plus is fine. It's maybe not as exemplar as you would like, but you can see it in the strikeout rate. It's more that he's just lost command again. And when I talked to him before, he said he'd lost his curveball, but he felt like there was something in his mechanics and they were going to figure it out, but it hasn't quite gotten there yet.
Let's talk about a few recent movers, though, as we kind of get closer to talking about Eno's main event team. I was looking at the patterns, just trying to...
We've already been talking about this whole time.
It's been kind of folded into the conversation. So I mentioned earlier, the moves up top, mostly pitching, right? If you look at main event versus non-main event drafts in March, you're going to see Skeens and Skubal up a few spots into the first round where they usually go. Logan Gilbert and Crochet and Burns and Sale, Jacob deGrom up 14 spots. So the overall component of the NFBC, folks trying to win the grand prize, that's going to also kind of increase some of the risk tolerance that you see. Closers get bumped up to Mason Miller, probably the biggest riser, up 18 picks in main event drafts compared to the non-mains in March. That's all typical stuff. Interesting that Jackson Churio is one of the few position players, along with Wyatt Langford, the young stud early round position players, get a bump in these formats too, 4 and 8 picks respectively. So you see the older veteran guys I mentioned before falling. Acuna fell. I think part of that's news too. The news on him is fine, but it's just confirmation of missed time as expected coming off the second ACL tear. But then you see like the Corey Seagers, the Pete Alonsos, the Jose Altuves, Ozzy Albies, those guys all fall a little bit too. I think the mid-round movement is really interesting because you start to see some clear preferences on some of the guys that might be considered as underpriced pitchers, like Tanner Bybee getting jumped up more than 25 picks in main event drafts. Joe Ryan with good health this spring getting pushed up 20. And then even that next wave of closers, Ryan Walker up more than 30 picks in the mains. Jeff Hoffman up almost 60. Tanner Scott, who got the save in the Dodgers opener, more than 40 picks up. So I'm just kind of curious, like you've played this for a few years. You're not new to it. What do you do to account for that quick shift in the approach in that room? Because it just doesn't play like the other draft rooms that we've been in for most of the winter.
Yeah. It is tough because as I described the sort of game of chicken where you have your values and you have the ADP and you have to play some game between them, which is, can I get this guy around later? Because you have your value. If you just stuck to your values, you would make reaches that the whole room would be like, wow, and you don't almost want that. You want to sneak them in. You'd be like somebody, you want the like, ooh, nice pick. Not the like, wow, like you just jumped that guy 3 rounds off of ADP, And so as these things are moving across, what I still use as an anchor point, as always, my value sheet. What's my value sheet? Again, another point for me though is that if I had a slightly different weighting on the different projections that I've aggregated in my value sheet, then I'd have different numbers, So you have to have a little bit of error bands around what you're doing. In my main event, I made a plan. I when I saw our pick, I looked through what was going through, and we immediately started talking about the players we would take. And we had a plan for those first 3, and we went exactly according to plan. That was the meshing of our values and the ADP and saying, Henderson, Merrill, Machado. That's going to work for us, and it did. So then when it came back to us in the 4th round, we thought, we'll just look at what available pitchers are there. So that's a moment where you look around the room and you say, what's been happening? And because we took Machado after that long, pitcher run, it was basically Cease was sitting there for us, and it was Cease or Yamamoto. And we just took Cease because we felt the bulk would be there and the strikeouts are there. This is where the next round is where things started, that chicken and what's happening in the room started to come together. So you can see, Glasnow, Strider go. We had Fromber, in our sort of top 12 pitchers. And so for Fromber to still be there after almost everybody has a pitcher was like, okay, Fromber types are the types that can fall down. They're the kind of what you were saying earlier, like the boring veterans, right? Mm-hmm. And so Fromber sitting there, and we're like, oh crap, we also wanted to get one of the top closers, and we'd been hoping that Durand would make it back. But the closers all got helium. You saw Durand goes at the very beginning of the 4th round. That's actually sort of 15 up on his ADP. And so closers got all this helium, and we were like, oh man, we're looking at Jeff Hoffman here. So we were like debating in the room, Valdez or Hoffman? Do we participate in the closer inflation? And that's always your question. Do you participate or do you go the other direction? And we said, you know what? If we lose Hoffman, so what? Maybe we can take Scott in the next round. We'll figure something out at closer. Fromber's too good of a pitcher to be here. And so we took Fromber, and then we got real lucky. Hoffman just slid right back to us. Because all the guys, everybody else had taken a closer already and had participated in the inflation. And so there's Edwin Diaz. You can see it. Edwin Diaz, Josh Hader, Mason Miller, Devin Williams, and Ryan Helsley to the right of us. So when the draft went that way, they're all like, well, I'm not taking Hoffman as my second closer this early in the draft. And so really, I think just generally you want to zig when other people zag. But that's hard to do. So what I would say is zig when other people zag, but always use as your North Star your own values, right? So always be checking your values and who's the best value on the board according to your values. Then check ADP. Then maybe take a sneak peek at the board and see what people have been doing. And I think for us that ended up with Hoffman was not our target. We wanted Duran, but what we felt like the way we put it was Framber for us was an extra pick. You could shift our whole board up, Hoffman that pick, and it would look like we'd sort of planned to do. But instead we got Framber plus Hoffman, and that was something that I think was born of not participating in the inflation.
So there's another way I've thought about this a few times, and maybe I've articulated it on the show this way before, but in an auction setting, if you pay a few extra dollars at the top of the pool, then that money typically comes off from the bottom, and a couple of the $2 and $3 and $4 guys on your sheet end up going for $1, right? That's just usually how the money gets balanced out. And I do think the same effect happens with inflation in drafts. It's just not dollars. It's rounds. And the way you're thinking about it is a good way to think about it. If you flip Will Smith into the spot where Jeff Hoffman went, you took Will Smith, the catcher, in the 7th, right? So if you put him in the 6th and you got Hoffman in the 7th, you'd have felt good about that. If you'd taken Brian Reynolds in the 7th instead of Hoffman, you would have felt good about that. If you'd taken Matt Chapman in the 8th instead of the 9th, you'd have felt good about that. Like, the discounts come back. So I think you have to understand that unless there's a great path for you, unless you really believe in some of the late closers, the guys that are available at like pick 125, 150, 175, and those are guys that were previously at 175, 200, and 225. Unless you like that group, it's okay to pay that tax at least one time. This is where I've kind of landed as like a happy medium. The double tapping early closers seems like it costs you too much, but getting one in a league where there's no trading, where there's 14 other teams battling in fab, trying to get saves when closers become available on the waiver wire at top dollar, that's where I feel like you just have to sort of take your medicine. And I think you had things break in a way that worked really well. If you had seen the teams next to you, you mentioned that they all had closers already when you decided to take Valdez and roll the dice on Hoffman falling. If one of those teams hadn't drafted a closer already, would you have gone ahead and just taken Hoffman and not taken that chance? Was that the difference for you between gambling or not?
Because of Tanner Scott.
Because of Scott. Because there were two.
We had Hoffman and Scott. They're not really in the quote unquote circle of trust of like elite closers, but they're in the circle of trust as like, okay, that's good enough. We got one, So because of Scott, we felt good about it. It's also interesting to me, I think, when you will create a draft where you're making choice. My joke is in the listener draft was that there are always 3 guys you want with their next 2 picks, and that means going in different directions. And what happens is you will have weaknesses. So obviously Hoffman is our closer 1. That's a weakness compared to other teams. We got near the bottom of the top 15 closers. When you do that, I think it does make sense with the sort of yo-yo idea, which is to take a more top-end sleeper at that position. You can do that way later. So in the 13th round, we took AJ Puck. That's nearer to the beginning of iffy closers, right? But we felt the projection was so good we could use him just as a pitcher sometimes, even if he's not always getting saves. But also he papers over one of our issues with Hoffman. And we ended with, like as I mentioned before, Clevenger and Brisky. So you will always make mistakes. You'll always have weaknesses on your roster, and you just have to kind of spend a little bit more downdraft to paper over those. But also another thing, when I was looking at this nice list of risers and fallers you put together, when I'm looking at that list of fallers, like it's not obvious to me what they did wrong. Like Mookie, I get it, but Tatis, Harper, Marte, Manny Machado, what did Manny Machado do wrong, to go down 5 picks? Corey Seager, Pete Alonso, Jose Altuve, like these guys are not exciting. There's like an oatmeal thing that happens to some extent.
Right. I think they get, for the most part, that group gets passed up for pitching because everyone feels there's a similar player to them later. They're more agnostic about either what position they get with their early round building blocks or they think the categorical balances are pretty similar for most of those players, and it just doesn't matter as much. Whereas I think the preferences for who people like in their circle of trust for aces is stronger. I think, I don't know if that's a false sense of control, but the result of those guys falling, I don't think it's anything going on with them that's news related. It's just pitching went up. So these are the hitters that came down, and
that's smart. In your biggest risers, you have Paul Skeens, Tarek Skubal, Logan Gilbert, Garrett Crochet, Corbin Burns, Chris Sale, Jacob deGrom. So pitching gets inflated in these drafts. I don't think pitching needs to get inflated in your 12 team. No. I don't think you need to do that. There's a lot of that. So a lot of those. So we also had to ask this question last week. Like, how much do you care about ME information? How much do you care about that NFC information if you're not in NFC? And in this case, you might look at this and be like, they've got it wrong for my league. I want Bryce Harper and Manny Machado and Corey Seager and Jose Altuve rather than the opposite, than not having them and having a great pitcher at the top. So.
Right. Well, because if you're playing in a 10 or a 12 team league and maybe it's not fab, it's first come, first serve on the waiver wire. This is a completely different construct with the IL spots like we talked about earlier. You are going to find that streaming and just targeting the pitchers you want in that league is going to be a lot different than in the once a week fab pickup system where everybody's hyper focused on what they need. And it's a different collection of players and mindsets, and you have to sort of account for that. I would say if you're not playing NFBC and you want to find some information that's useful on a sheet like this or an information like this, it's the magnitude of the risers. It's not just like, oh, Skeens is up 3 spots, I should go get Paul Skeens. That doesn't really mean anything. It's when you see massive jumps, when you see that pool, the folks paying $1,800 for their entry, pushing guys up 50, 60 picks. Like the later movers, I think, are more interesting because that might guide you to some actual sleepers for 10 and 12 team leagues.
Tanner Bybee being up 26, Joe Ryan, that means they feel he's healthy. Ryan Walker, he's entering the circle of trust. I would be Robbie Ray, healthy. I would be a little bit wary about closes in general. That fits into just a room situation thing where I think most players get a closer you like and maybe get 2, but in a 10 or 12 team league, they're going to be enough closers for everybody.
Right. So I would not take what's happening with the closers here in a vacuum and apply that anywhere else.
One thing I would do though is look especially at who even later than these mid rounders. What type of starting pitchers are main event people taking mid to late?
That's the group you want. Those to me are the market sleepers, the high stakes market undervalued sleeper pitchers are probably the guys that poured over most effectively as players you do on a roster in more shallow leagues. They're being pushed up because the expectation is that they're going to pop, right? And it's not surprising. It's guys we've talked about going all the way back through position previews. The 3 that I saw that are moving up the most, Gavin Williams, Jesus Luzardo, Clay Holmes.
Jesus Luzardo, who's starting the second game of the season.
Yeah.
Clay Holmes is opening day starter. I mean,
opening day starter Clay Holmes.
There's some signal there.
Yeah.
Their teams really like them, and I think they're going to win an early game with them. They're not sticking them on the back where they can skip them, So in our league, if there's somebody to be pulled across from our draft, we definitely went. So after we had Cease, Valdez, and Hoffman, we were like, it is time for hitters. And so we went Will Smith, Brian Reynolds, Matt Chapman, Ian Happ, Andres Jimenez, Paul Goldschmidt. That is oatmeal, isn't it? It's pretty oatmeal-y. But
it's 15
high end. Yeah, high end, good oatmeal. I mean, all those guys. One way that JH put it is all those guys are going to hit in the top 4 of their lineup and play every day.
Yeah. That's exactly what they all should do that.
And then we had to take Puck because we took Hoffman, and that cost us a little bit, but it was at a time when taking Puck cost us Reynaldo Lopez or Zach Eflin. We were like, do we need Zach Eflin as our 3rd starter? No. At this point, we've decided we have 2 good starters, 2 good relievers, and then the rest of our 9, the next 5, we're just going to get 10 pitchers to fill those 5 spots. and we're just going to be choosing every week, you know? And so once we made that decision, it made it even easier for us to get Nico Horner, Lars Nootbaar, Jake Cronenworth, Patrick Bailey, as between our pitchers. But these are the pitchers we took once we decided to start taking pitchers. Reese Olson, Grant Holmes, Yu Darvish, Tyler Megill, Jack Leiter, Landon Roop, Osvaldo Bido, Chris Paddock, and Brisky and Clevenger at the end. So some of those are obvious ones. You're like, oh yeah, you got Bido. Of course you did, you know. Leiter is a stuffist. Megill is on my breakout list. Duh. Some of those are the YOLO yo-yo. Yu Darvish, because if he's in and healthy, he's fine. You know, he's good. Reese Olson is just a kind of a park play, you know. Grant Holmes he's not a stuffist, and then there's a load him on here. Chris Paddock gets the White Sox in his first start. That's the only reason we drafted him.
I had a feeling that Paddock was a streamer, and that's something that playing with JH for the last couple of seasons now too. JH is looking at the schedule before anybody else I know. He's already thinking about it like in January. He's like, hey, here's who pitcher gets the White Sox in the first series of the season.
I think if you wanted to see anything off of my draft and be like, oh, like that's something I could take away from Main Event, is that in the 22nd and 23rd round of my draft, we went Jack Leiter and Landon Roop. Those are two that we've we put our finger on those guys. And you've heard me talk about Jack Leiter. The walks have come back a little bit this spring, but I think that'll just be a thing he comes and goes for him. I don't know if we've talked about Landon Roop enough.
Probably not.
He added a hard slider, like a gyro slider that functions as a cutter for him. And he's been intensely good this spring, really. He's had maybe one bad outing, but he has gone deep he's looked really professional out there. And from what I gather, he is the favorite for the fifth role.
Makes me a little sad about my Hayden Birdsong shares, but you know, it's a soft enough
pretty
group,
bad
though.
news for Kyle Harrison.
Yeah, what that will be unpacked on a future episode. But yeah, Landon Roop getting that spot would be huge. Would make him an early season pickup in leagues that have already drafted, because he was undrafted, I think, for a good portion of this draft season. At least the non-draft and hold situations. I'm sure he's rostered in all of the 50 rounders, because almost everybody gets rostered in the 50 rounders. Except for Mason Miller, the year Mason Miller broke through. I think that was like one of the best players that didn't get drafted in the 50 rounders because of the injury history and all the uncertainty there. But yeah, it looks like a really strong squad, and not surprising. Knowing you and JH, that's, you know, kind of the way I expect you guys to play. Like I didn't look at that board and go, I can't believe they did that. I looked at that board and said, yeah, they had a plan and they executed it. So hope it works out for you guys.
The bench is funny because we have Jake Myers and Orlando Arcia, and it's like you're like, why would you even bother? Well, because we have Nico Horner, and you just generally want to have coverage in week one in case somebody else goes down. I mean, we have basically Nico Horner and Lars Nootbaar and Jake Fraley. It's like, let's have an outfielder on our bench and let's have a middle infielder on our bench. And we have Gunnar Henderson, you know. Who I think is going to be fine for the beginning of the season. That's what we've heard. But Orlando Arcia was kind of a high-end, like, paper over it, or he's a guy, you know, that's going to be gone. And yes, knowing JH, the last 8 picks of our roster have like a 0% chance of making it to the end of the season.
Replacements have already been lined up. And
yeah, the closest I'd say is if Clevenger or Brisky like turned into was announced the full-time closer on day one, then we'd be like, okay, well, one of our darts landed, but otherwise.
Yeah, the darts are there to be dropped. That's probably the way it's going to go, more likely than not. We need to go. We're running a tad long. You can find Eno on Blue Sky, enosaris.bsky.social. I'm dvr.bsky.social. Thanks to our producer, Brian Smith, for putting this episode together. That's going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We're back with you on Wednesday.
Thanks for listening.